Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Borat Subsequent Moviefilm. Although I had my reservations when I heard they were making another Borat movie, because I thought we had sort of been there, done that with Sacha Cohen, that character, and this kind of way of doing things that he used to. I know he had that Showtime show that really no one talked about, but other than that, he's never really returned to this sort of thing. I thought he had moved on, and I didn't know after the first Borat film and the years of the Ali G show if he could really continue doing this, and if it would actually be funny. And I will say, the first thing is that this movie is actually really funny. Like most long-awaited sequels, or sequels that took a long time between them, I don't know how long-awaited it was, but this kind of plays like that, in that they're always like never as good as the original, but they're pretty much like the best you could probably get from one of those sequels. So it's like good, but not like I'm gonna watch this maybe again good or quote it or anything, but it's very talked about at the time, and maybe it'll live a little bit longer in my memory. I think this might be a little beyond good, but it's not going to be like what the first one was or what the Ali G show was or something like that, but it's still actually really funny. So if you're just looking at this film in terms of comedy sake, you're actually, it's a good time, it's a good night, you'll laugh a bunch of times, stuff like that. Will you laugh as much as the first Borat film? No. Will it surprise you as much as it used to? Absolutely not. But if you're going to just watch like, hey, I want to watch a fun, sequel Borat movie, it doesn't disappoint. I think the big thing, and I think a lot of people have said this, but I agree with it, the world that the Ali G show lived in and Borat lived in is a completely different world than we are in now. That film came out in 2006, and it was sort of the end of that era. And then, there was Bruno, but like, do we count that? I never saw it, so whatever. Borat felt like there's all this Ali G show, which was all very funny, and then we get the Borat movie. And I know Borat surprised people. Most people haven't seen the Ali G show. You should. It's on HBO Max. Apparently, I didn't actually check. Getting people to say, kind of racist or sexist or homophobic things in 2006, which was, by the way, pre-Obama. This was when George W. Bush was president, when he was doing a lot of these things. That was surprising in that era, because you wouldn't catch people doing that on a mainstream kind of TV channel or have those statements broadcast on the evening news. And in this, when you have Rudy Giuliani basically, before the scene that everyone's talking about, he sort of just says, the coronavirus is engineered by China and like release and all that. Even though that's incredibly, racist and hateful and not true, he still is very comfortable saying that in a interview. Like, they didn't coerce him into saying that, he just did it. So there is a whole line of this movie that, like, I feel like he wants it to be more activist filmmaking, and I don't think it really achieves what he thinks it does. I think he made more points and more interesting points with the Ali G show, with Borat, things like that. There's nothing in this film that like illuminated me or made me want to vote more. I had voted earlier that day, so it didn't work out maybe for me, but I think maybe there's a few people this might. I don't think I'm naive in saying that there's probably someone whose mind may have been changed, may have been a little surprised, but I think for the most part, most people really won't be, and it's a piece of art. This isn't as surprising. It just feels like kind of a comeback tour, a juxtaposition of the worlds between when the first Borat film is to this one. I'm sure is incredibly fascinating, and as a like piece related to the other piece, yeah, absolutely kind of makes a statement. But I just didn't feel like the artist's intent in this case didn't, I think, officially work the way he thought it would. But as a comedy, I think it absolutely does work, and it's really funny. And I was surprised because I think, like, the thing about Borat is I did really like the Ali G show. My wife was a big fan of it. We had the DVDs, we watched it a bunch back in the day, but that was a long time ago, and like the mid 2000s or something. And even when I was watching it, it was sort of outdated. So it felt like sitcoms were making jokes of like, haha, you're gonna do a Borat impression, because it's so passe. I am still very surprised by the fact that this could be as funny as it is and still keep the character fresh. That's actually something we really shouldn't discount at all, because that's not something a lot of people can do currently. That's something it's really hard to do, actually. If you look at, like, when we bring up a lot of these people in these follow-up sequels, a lot of people are kind of coming back, but I think with, you look at Terminator or Star Wars or Bill and Ted, which I'll bring up in a little bit, I think those are people, like, people want them to come back. But in a sense, Borat, like, no one really wanted Borat to come back, you know what I mean? No one was like, there wasn't like articles or think pieces or videos like, Sacha Baron Cohen should really go back to that. Like, he was doing it with Showtime, no one really cared, and then he comes back with Borat, and it's like he comes back kind of in his former glory, at least in terms of comedy. I think that's actually pretty cool, to be honest. You know, that's pretty amazing. Like, not a lot of people can do that when you're considered passe, not really talked about. And so that's definitely an accomplishment, I think, in itself. A lot of this is like Borat is basically became a major celebrity because of the first film, and his country actually like really hates him and put him in jail all this time in a working camp, and decided to send him back to America to go with their number one porno star, who's this monkey, to give to Michael Pence to get on Donald Trump's good side so he can be in the strong man's club or whatever. And his daughter, who he's basically ignored her whole life, mostly because he's been in prison, but also because he doesn't consider women really at all. His country really doesn't consider women to have any rights because she's just in a cage in the back, you know, with the farm animals and things. He basically ignores her, but kind of meets her a little bit, but she decides to stow away and goes on the trip with him to America to try to impress Michael Pence and Donald Trump. And Maria Bakalova is really, really good in this. I think she basically is on par with Sacha Baron Cohen. I was a little surprised at how good she was in this film. It was like they felt like a comedy duo had been working together for years. They had such great father-daughter chemistry together. I thought those roles worked really, really well. I was actually sort of surprised by it, like, because she's new to this territory. I don't think she wasn't in the Showtime show. She wasn't in anything else with him, and she feels like a veteran at this. She's so well trained. Like, she definitely has some amazing comedic chops because she just goes full into it, and you don't question her at all because she's so funny and so ready to go. And there's certain things with Sacha Baron Cohen, there's certain things without, and not just the Rudy Giuliani stuff. There's other stuff that is actually really funny where she's talking over to a conference of women, and it feels just like a Borat scene. The fact that she can play that, who's obviously done that for years and years, and does it like a performance on par with him, I think is actually really amazing. Cheers to her. I'm excited to see her in more stuff, to be honest. It was like kind of surprising, since we don't get as many movies right now because of COVID. We have like honestly like a whole new kind of like major comedic force to come out of this. Is like pretty cool. I know Sacha Baron Cohen's trying to campaign for her to get an Oscar nomination. I would agree with that. I think it is a really great breakout comic role. She's genuinely really funny. Most of this film, like the pranks in this, I guess, or the when he's catching people, are pretty funny. There's certain things like the thing in the synagogue, I just thought it's like uncomfortable. I know he let the women in on the gag, supposedly. He got out of character and like actually spoke to them about like his intent and things like that, which is like actually very sweet. But the scene just didn't play that way for me. It was like a little like sort of gross. Like, I get what he's doing, but it's like, I think sometimes like that kind of humor, that cringy humor is not really what anyone's about at this point. And especially like, I thought that might have been pushing it a little, but like other things like him and the two guys kind of going on the kind of QAnon conspiracy stuff, I thought was kind of interesting. I do think a lot of what he's doing with the people who are in the service industry, like the woman who writes the thing on the cake, I think that sort of like people are like, oh, it's outrageous she would do that. I was like, you don't know what it's like to work in the service industry, and sometimes you just want to get through the day and pay your bills. And I'm sure that lady was like, I can't believe I just did that, but I can pay my electricity bill. So I think like when people go like, I can't believe she did that, it's more like, I can't believe people are put in those situations that they just have to do that and sort of like zone out, because she probably does morally disagree with that, but she probably just goes like, I just need to get this cake because, you know, we need to, you know, make sure I can keep my staff and my health insurance and stuff like that. And as horrible as that situation sounds, it's more of a reality. And I think like a couple people brought up the service industry and how, you know, Sacha Baron Cohen, when he edits these things, he doesn't really put in the full scope of like that these people just sort of have to put up with this. And I think the take often is like, can you believe these people did this? And I'm like, you should think about the society that is set up that these people have to do this just simply to survive, is really the take you really should be getting from all this, but whatever. But I did like how he uses kind of the people who are kind of inadvertently playing straight men. Like they use a fax machine with a guy on a fax, which is actually, they had good chemistry together. Him and a guy in like a tech store who he buys a cell phone from, they have great chemistry. So I like that, like how he uses some people. The Rudy Giuliani scene is interesting because like I'm surprised he didn't, the part that you've all seen on Twitter, there's a part before that where he actually comes in and even says like, oh, I know you like to like marry your first cousin and stuff. And I don't know if that was dubbed later. It didn't look like it was. I'm surprised Rudy Giuliani didn't catch on. And they do break up the scene right before anything happens. The interesting thing I learned about this scene is, one, he stopped it from going too far because he wanted to protect Maria Bakalova. He wanted to protect her from anything bad happening, but apparently also they can't use the footage if he had exposed himself. Legally, once it's a sexual act and people aren't aware of it, then it's illegal and they couldn't use the footage in the movie. So it's like I'm sure he was protecting her. I'm not trying to act like he's an awful person, but the legal element of it is that he literally couldn't use it in the movie if that had gone that far. So they got as close to the line it looked like of someone, I guess, tucking in their shirt is what some people say, but it didn't look like that way to me. I've never tucked in my shirt that way. And also there's a quick scene of her going with the only news network, I think, or America's News Network, or whatever, the one that Trump likes, and they go into the White House and actually see Trump and meet Donald Jr. It's not necessarily funny enough to go in the movie. I get why they cut it for thematic reasons, but it's a little odd. You wouldn't just leave it in there, because this film does feel, I will say, and this is not directed by the guy Larry Charles who directed the last one. It's directed by Jason Wolner, who is also from Human Giant, much like I recently reviewed Vampires vs. the Bronx. It seems like a lot of people coming out of the Aziz Ansari Human Giant SNL thing are becoming comedy filmmakers themselves. That seems to be the new era, who are really taking over these major comedies. Unlike Larry Charles, that film felt a little looser, or my memory of it at least, felt a little less structured with this stuff. This felt much more structured and coordinated and stuff. I know they shot a lot of things with people from the first film and the thing at the White House and stuff like that, but which I think you could have gotten to work, but whatever. But it did feel a little more structured and tighter, because you had an actual filmmaker and storyteller there, maybe more so, and maybe they sort of pointed at what they were doing, maybe, I don't know, but you could tell a difference. I think he's also maybe not, because I think a lot of people who are trying to do this kind of activism comedy, they sort of don't fully get the line, because I think a lot of the stuff, particularly the SNL stuff, can become more activism than actual comedy, and there's people who are really good at it even on comedy and stuff like that, but I feel like often we don't end up getting with those people. A lot of times it's more about the activism than it is about the comedy, and they're sort of that's the point, and I'm like, yeah, but I was already on your side and I'm not laughing, so I don't fully think that's entirely working. But one of the things I did find interesting about this is how it sort of related to even the recent Bill and Ted movie, because in Bill and Ted you had this whole thing of two guys who very much in the film, those guys were part of the dude culture of the early 90s, was very much male centric, and then they have two daughters and they're passing on their legacy to their daughters. And in this, you have the same thing in a long-awaited sequel, but I wouldn't say Borat represents this as much to masculinity, or at least to me personally, as Borat did. But it's interesting, you're having this specifically with a lot of these long-awaited sequels, you're passing on to the next generation, who are usually female in these. You see that with Star Wars, you see that with Terminator Dark Fate, you see it with Bill and Ted, and you see it here. I think in a lot of those represent a lot more. I don't think this represents what those do. I don't think it's trying to represent that necessarily. I think the main thing about it is he kind of is inviting a new comedy voice through this. It's one thing, I think, to just let's get the band back together and do it like we used to, but it's interesting, he understands he sort of has to change it, and I think it's more about the change of society, the change of having more comedic voices than he already did, which is mainly himself, but whatever, and having someone who's worthy enough to take on, just comedically take on that. So it's interesting that trope keeps coming up. I'm curious what that, I would prefer it to be someone who's very different, or who's gay or something like that, maybe, if we're going to continue this trope, because I think in Bill and Ted it represented something, but at a certain point, I don't know if this represents as much the trope in itself, but maybe, it's not trying to represent as much in that. So I think the Borat Subsequent Moviefilm is actually really funny. I think it's more worth your time than I ever thought it would be. I'm surprised it's taken off the way it has, but I think much like the original, I think there's a bit of a surprise that he still does this, that he could catch Rudy Giuliani, that he could do the scene with Mike Pence, that he could still be as funny as it is. It's surprising, not as cutting edge, I guess, or gut busting hilarious as he used to be, but it's still I still feel like it's a good sort of return to form, and still a good funny movie. And I think that's sort of what we want right now is just a good time, an hour and a half to 2 hours of just a good time at the movies, which I think is something that happened in the Great Depression, I guess, is working out now, but something with a little more political humor to it. But I don't think it necessarily makes the point or the artist's intent is trying to do, and very much pushing forward. But I think overall, if you're just coming to this movie to laugh, which is probably the best attitude to have with it, you'll have a pretty decent time. It might not do everything it's trying to do. It might not be really exposing people who kind of literally or figuratively expose themselves all the time, but it's still very funny. And I think ultimately, like, what you see Borat for is to laugh and have a good time, and maybe that's all maybe this film was meant to do. So if you've seen Borat Subsequent Moviefilm and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. I'm not saying all the titles. There's a lot of titles if you've seen the movie, but I'm not saying the long one. That's like, could I say it? No, I don't think I could. It's just Borat Subsequent Moviefilm to me. I think that's the best way to do it.